In Towson, Maryland, an 80-year-old retired librarian was about to discover a betrayal that would shake her to her core. What started as a routine monthly review of her financial statements took a shocking turn when she came face to face with evidence that someone she trusted had been systematically stealing from her. Jasmin Brown wasn't your typical elderly widow living alone in a Victorian home. For over 40 years, she had spent her life organizing information and solving problems at the Baltimore library system, known for her sharp mind and methodical approach to everything in her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Jasmin Brown's study, casting intricate shadows across the mahogany desk where she had conducted her financial affairs for the past 5 years. At 80, her movements were deliberate rather than slow, each gesture carrying the precision of someone who had spent 4 decades organizing information for others. She adjusted her reading glasses and opened the manila folder labeled October 2024, with the same ritualistic care she had once reserved for cataloging rare manuscripts at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Robert's leather chair still held the faint scent of his cologne, a ghost that comforted rather than haunted her. This monthly review had become her anchor after his death, a practice that honored both his meticulous financial planning and her own need for order in a world that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. The Victorian house in Towson seemed to echo with decades of family dinners and birthday celebrations, but now it was just her and the careful documentation of a life measured in bank statements and insurance policies. Jasmin spread the papers across the desk with practiced efficiency, her librarian's mind automatically organizing them by date and institution. First, the checking account statement from First National, always reviewed first because Robert had insisted on paying bills from this account. Then the savings account, their modest nest egg that had grown through years of careful stewardship and Robert's prudent investments. Finally, the insurance and investment statements that represented their legacy for Marcus, Patricia, and Carmen. But something was wrong. The checking account showed the expected debits, utilities, property taxes, her monthly grocery allocation. But there, on page 2, were 3 electronic transfers she didn't recognize, each for $5,000, dated the 15th, 20th, and 25th of last month. Jasmin removed her glasses, cleaned them with the soft cloth Robert had always kept in the desk drawer, and looked again. The transfers remained, stark black numbers that didn't belong in her carefully ordered financial world. Electronic withdrawal, authorized account holder, read the notation beside each transaction. But Jasmin had never authorized any such transfers. She hadn't even known her account was set up for electronic transactions beyond her monthly Social Security deposit. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the savings account statement. The balance was $15,000 lower than it should have been. $15,000 that had disappeared without her knowledge or consent, leaving behind only cryptic notations about authorized transfers to account ending in 7,439. Jasmin stood, her knees protesting after 2 hours of sitting, and walked to the built-in bookshelf where Robert had kept their important documents. Her eyes swept the familiar spines, photo albums, old tax returns, the leather box containing her grandmother's jewelry that she planned to give Carmen for her 50th birthday next year. The leather box was gone. She searched the shelf again, moving aside Robert's collection of Civil War histories and her own treasured first editions. But the space where the jewelry box had sat for the past 5 years was empty, marked only by a dust-free rectangle on the wood. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible in the morning stillness. She moved to the small curio cabinet, where Robert's father's gold pocket watch had been displayed since their wedding day. The watch, a Hamilton Railway special that had kept time for 3 generations of Brown men, was also missing. Jasmin's breath came in short, measured counts as she forced herself to think systematically. She had cleaned this room thoroughly just last week, as she did every Tuesday. The jewelry box and the watch had been in their proper places then. She was certain of it because she had dusted around them, had even opened the box to ensure the pearls weren't tangling in their silk pouch. Someone had been in her house. Someone had taken these treasures and somehow gained access to her bank accounts. With hands that no longer trembled, crisis had always steadied her. Jasmin returned to the desk and reached for the phone. Marcus would know what to do. Despite his recent troubles with the construction business, he had always been her practical child, the one who helped her navigate the digital banking systems that baffled her. "Mom?" Marcus's voice carried that particular note of tired patience that had become familiar since Patricia had started working longer hours at the real estate office. "Is everything okay?" "It's pretty early." "Marcus, I need to ask you something important." Jasmin kept her voice level, professional. "Have you had any reason to access my bank accounts recently? Perhaps to help with some transaction I might have forgotten?" The pause that followed lasted too long. In her years as a librarian, Jasmin had learned to read silences as carefully as words. "Mom, what are you talking about? Why would I need to access your accounts?" "Because someone has taken $15,000 from my savings account, and your father's watch and my grandmother's jewelry are missing." Another pause. Then Marcus's voice pitched slightly higher. "Mom, slow down. You're getting yourself worked up. When was the last time you actually looked at those statements? Sometimes banks have delays in processing." Marcus. The single word carried all the authority she had once used to quiet a children's reading room. "I review these statements on the same day every month. I have done so for 5 years. The money was taken in 3 separate electronic transfers last month, and the jewelry and watch are gone from this house." She heard whispered conversation in the background, Patricia's voice too low to make out words, but urgent in tone. "Listen, Mom," Marcus said, and now his voice carried a different quality, a careful gentleness that raised every instinct she had developed in 50 years of dealing with people who thought her age meant diminished capability. "Sometimes when we're under stress, or when we're grieving, our memory can play tricks on us. Why don't Patricia and I come over? We can help you look for the jewelry. Maybe you moved it somewhere safe and forgot." "I did not move anything, and my memory is perfectly fine." "Of course it is." Patricia's voice had taken over the phone. "Jasmin, honey, we're just worried about you. You've been under so much pressure since Robert passed, and sometimes—" Jasmin hung up the phone. She sat in Robert's chair, surrounded by the evidence of theft and betrayal, and felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't fear, though fear would have been reasonable. It wasn't anger, though anger was certainly present. It was recognition, the same feeling she had experienced when discovering that a library patron had been systematically stealing rare books by creating false checkout records. Someone was stealing from her. Someone with access to her house and her financial information. Someone who knew her well enough to believe they could gaslight her into questioning her own perceptions. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Through the front window, Jasmin could see Marcus's truck in her driveway, Patricia beside him on the front steps. They had driven from their house in Catonsville in record time, too quickly for people who had been surprised by her call. She opened the door to find Marcus holding a bag from her favorite bakery, and Patricia carrying flowers. "Mom," Marcus said, his smile bright and familiar, "we brought you those cinnamon scones you love." Patricia thought some coffee and a nice visit might help us figure out what's going on. Patricia stepped forward, her arms open for a hug that Jasmin didn't return. "We're so sorry you're feeling confused, sweetie. These things happen, and there's no shame in needing a little help sorting things out." "I am not confused," Jasmin said quietly. "I am being robbed." She watched their faces carefully. Marcus's momentary flinch, Patricia's quick glance toward the study, the way they exchanged a look that spoke of prior conversation and shared knowledge. "Oh, honey," Patricia said, her voice dripping with concern. "You know we love you, right? And when we love someone, we want to make sure they're taking care of themselves. Sometimes, especially as we get older, it becomes harder to keep track of things." Marcus nodded earnestly. "That's why we think it might be time to have you checked out by a doctor, just to make sure everything's okay upstairs." He tapped his temple with a gentle smile. "There's no shame in getting older, Mom. but there are ways to help manage the changes that come with aging. Jasmin stepped back, seeing clearly for the first time. The too quick arrival. The carefully rehearsed concern. The immediate leap to questioning her mental capacity rather than investigating her claims. "I want you both to leave," she said quietly. "Mom," Marcus started. "Now." Patricia's mask slipped just slightly, revealing something sharp and calculating underneath. "Jasmin, we're trying to help you. If you won't let us help you, maybe we need to find someone else who can. Maybe it's time to look into some professional assistance." The threat hung in the autumn air between them, polite and devastating. After they left, Jasmin returned to Robert's study and took out a fresh legal pad, the same kind she had used for decades to track overdue books and plan library programs. At the top of the first page, she wrote "evidence" in her careful script. Below that, she began documenting everything she could remember about the missing money and stolen items, the dates and times, her son's too quick arrival and practiced responses. She had spent a lifetime organizing information, and she would use every skill she possessed to document what was happening to her. Because she was certain now that this was only the beginning. The morning light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the desk where she worked. But Jasmin Brown no longer felt the comforting presence of routine. Instead, she felt the cold certainty that someone she loved was systematically destroying the life she and Robert had built together. And they thought she was too old and too trusting to fight back. They were about to learn otherwise. 2 weeks after discovering the theft, Jasmin found herself in the passenger seat of Marcus's truck, watching the familiar streets of Towson blur past as they drove toward downtown Baltimore. Her evidence notebook lay hidden in her purse, now containing 4 pages of meticulously documented observations, including the fact that Marcus had called her 3 times in the past week to, quote, check on her memory, and Patricia had stopped by twice with prepared meals she claimed Jasmin had requested, but never had. "Dr. Steinberg is supposed to be one of the best neurologists in Maryland," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying that same practiced concern that had become his default tone with her. Patricia's friend recommended him. "He specializes in memory issues." Jasmin stared out the window, noting how quickly this appointment had been arranged. She had finally agreed to see a doctor, not because she believed anything was wrong with her mind, but because she needed to prove to everyone, including potential legal authorities, that she was mentally competent. What she hadn't expected was Marcus's insistence on this particular doctor, in this particular office, with this particular urgency. The medical building was sleek and modern, all glass and chrome that seemed designed to make patients feel small. Dr. Richard Steinberg's office occupied half of the 14th floor, with views of the inner harbor that spoke of expensive overhead. The waiting room was nearly empty at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, unusual for such a supposedly prominent practice. "Mrs. Brown?" A young receptionist with kind eyes gestured them forward. "Dr. Steinberg is ready to see you now." Jasmin noticed how Marcus straightened in his chair, checking his watch with an odd satisfaction. She had been a librarian long enough to recognize when someone was following a script. Dr. Steinberg's office was dominated by a massive desk and walls lined with medical diplomas and awards. The man himself was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that inspired immediate trust in most patients. But Jasmin had learned to read people carefully, and something in his too bright smile and overly firm handshake reminded her of used car salesmen. "Mrs. Brown, please have a seat," Dr. Steinberg said, gesturing to a chair positioned strategically so that Marcus could sit slightly behind her within the doctor's line of sight. "Your son has told me about some concerning incidents. Memory lapses, confusion about financial matters, misplacing valuable items." "I haven't misplaced anything," Jasmin said firmly. "Items have been stolen from my home, and money has been taken from my accounts without my authorization." Dr. Steinberg nodded sympathetically, but Jasmin caught the brief glance he exchanged with Marcus. "Of course, Mrs. Brown. These kinds of concerns are exactly why we're here today. Sometimes when our memory begins to change, We can feel like things are being taken or moved, when really we've simply forgotten where we put them. He pulled out a thick folder that seemed surprisingly well prepared for a first appointment. Now Marcus has provided me with some background information, and I'd like to start with a few simple questions to establish a baseline. The cognitive assessment that followed was perfunctory at best. Dr. Steinberg asked her to remember 3 words, count backward from 100 by sevens, and identify the current president. Jasmin answered each question correctly and completely. Her responses sharp and immediate. She even provided additional context when asked about recent events, demonstrating her clear recollection of news stories and personal activities. Very good, Dr. Steinberg said, but his tone suggested he had expected different results. Now, I'd like to show you some images and have you identify what you see. The picture cards were elementary, a clock showing 3:15, a drawing of a house, simple geometric shapes. Jasmin identified each one correctly, growing increasingly irritated with the patronizing nature of the examination. These tests seem designed for someone with severe cognitive impairment, she said. I came here hoping for a thorough evaluation, not a children's puzzle session. Of course, Dr. Steinberg replied smoothly. The cognitive portion is just the beginning. The real answers will come from your brain scans. This was news to Jasmin. I wasn't told I would be having any scans today. It's standard procedure, Marcus interjected quickly. Just to be thorough. Dr. Steinberg nodded. An MRI will give us a clear picture of what's happening in your brain. Any structural changes, signs of atrophy, abnormal protein deposits. The scan will reveal everything. The MRI appointment had apparently been scheduled for immediately after her consultation. Jasmin found herself in a hospital gown, lying in the claustrophobic tube of the imaging machine, wondering when exactly she had lost control of this process. The technician was efficient, but uncommunicative, and when Jasmin asked questions about the procedure, she was told that Dr. Steinberg would explain everything afterward. An hour later, she sat again in Dr. Steinberg's office, still feeling disoriented from the loud, repetitive sounds of the MRI machine. Marcus had returned from wherever he had disappeared to during her scan, looking oddly tense for someone supposedly concerned about his mother's well-being. Well, Mrs. Brown, Dr. Steinberg said, pulling up images on his computer screen that meant nothing to Jasmin's untrained eye. I'm afraid the results confirm what the cognitive assessment suggested. Jasmin felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? These images show clear signs of brain atrophy consistent with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, Dr. Steinberg said, pointing to areas on the scan with a pen. See these darker regions here and here? This indicates significant tissue loss in areas associated with memory and executive function. That's impossible, Jasmin said. I just answered all your questions correctly. I manage my household, my finances, my entire life without any assistance. Early-stage Alzheimer's can be very subtle, Dr. Steinberg explained with practiced patience. Patients often develop sophisticated coping mechanisms that mask the symptoms. The missing money and jewelry that you mentioned. These are classic examples of the kind of confusion that patients experience but rationalize as theft. Jasmin looked at Marcus, expecting to see shock or concern on his face. Instead, she saw something that chilled her. Relief. Her son looked relieved to hear that his mother had a degenerative brain disease. What are the next steps? Marcus asked, and Jasmin noticed that he had a folder of papers ready, as if he had known this moment was coming. Given the diagnosis and the incidents you've described, Dr. Steinberg said, sliding the folder across his desk toward Jasmin, I would strongly recommend that Mrs. Brown consider signing power of attorney documents to ensure her financial and medical decisions are handled by someone capable of making sound judgments. Jasmin opened the folder to find legal documents that had clearly been prepared in advance. Her name was already typed in the appropriate spaces, with Marcus listed as her primary attorney-in-fact for both financial and medical decisions. These papers give Marcus the authority to manage your accounts, make medical decisions, and handle your living arrangements as your condition progresses, Dr. Steinberg explained. It's really the most responsible thing to do given the circumstances. I'm not signing anything today, Jasmin said, closing the folder with deliberate calm. I need time to process this information and perhaps seek a second opinion. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Steinberg's professional smile became strained, and Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Mom, this is serious," Marcus said. "Dr. Steinberg is a respected specialist. What kind of second opinion are you looking for?" "The kind that involves a doctor who doesn't have papers drawn up before he's even examined his patient," Jasmin replied evenly. Dr. Steinberg's mask slipped completely for just a moment, revealing something calculating and unpleasant underneath. "Mrs. Brown, denial is a common response to this kind of diagnosis. But refusing to take appropriate action could put you and others at risk. If you're living alone and experiencing the kind of confusion that leads to accusations of theft—" "I am not confused," Jasmin interrupted, "and I am not signing these documents today." She stood, gathering her purse and the folder of papers. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Steinberg. I'll be in touch if I decide I need your services." Marcus jumped up. "Mom, you can't just walk out. We need to discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss right now," Jasmin said. "I'm going home to think about what I've heard today." As they waited for the elevator, Marcus's careful facade finally cracked. "You're being stubborn and irrational," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what could happen if you're declared incompetent by the state instead of handling this voluntarily?" Jasmin looked at her eldest son, the child she had rocked through nightmares, taught to ride a bicycle, proudly watched graduate from college, and saw a stranger who had somehow known exactly what Dr. Steinberg would find in her brain scan before the appointment had even begun. "Take me home, Marcus," she said quietly. The ride back to Towson was silent, except for the occasional sigh or muttered comment from Marcus about stubborn old women and reality checks. Jasmin stared out the window, her mind working with the systematic precision that had served her well through decades of managing complex library systems. Dr. Steinberg had pronounced her incompetent, but she had aced every cognitive test. He had papers ready for her to sign before the diagnosis was complete. Marcus had known to bring those papers and had shown relief rather than grief at hearing his mother had Alzheimer's. Most telling of all, they both seemed more concerned with her signing documents than with her supposed medical condition. As Marcus's truck pulled into her driveway, Jasmin clutched her purse, feeling the weight of her evidence notebook inside. She now had something new to document, a medical diagnosis that felt more like a business transaction than a healthcare consultation. "Think about what Dr. Steinberg said, Mom," Marcus called as she walked toward her front door. "These papers are for your own protection." Jasmin didn't respond. She was already planning her next move, and it didn't involve trusting anyone who had been part of today's carefully orchestrated performance. She needed a real doctor, someone who didn't already know what diagnosis she was supposed to have. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, and Jasmin Brown's mind had never felt sharper. She had spent the past 3 days since Dr. Steinberg's appointment documenting every detail she could remember, adding notes to her evidence journal about the pre-prepared legal documents and Marcus's suspicious behavior. Now, as she organized her thoughts in Robert's study, the doorbell rang with the insistent tone of someone conducting official business. Through the lace curtains, Jasmin could see a young Latina woman in professional attire standing on her front porch, a county government badge visible on her jacket. Her heart rate quickened. Had Marcus followed through on his veiled threats about state intervention? "Mrs. Brown?" The woman's voice was warm but official when Jasmin opened the door. "I'm Elena Rodriguez from Maryland Adult Protective Services. I'm here to conduct a routine welfare check based on a report we received about your well-being." Jasmin's grip tightened on the door handle. "What kind of report?" Elena consulted her tablet with practiced efficiency. An anonymous caller expressed concerns about potential self-neglect and confusion in an elderly resident at this address. "I know this might feel intrusive, Mrs. Brown, but these checks are standard procedure when we receive reports of concerning behavior." The phrase concerning behavior echoed Dr. Steinberg's words so precisely that Jasmin felt certain Marcus had made the call. But something in Elena's manner, respectful rather than condescending, patient rather than rushed, made her step aside. "Please come in," Jasmin said. Though I should tell you that I believe this report was filed maliciously by someone who has been stealing from me." Elena paused in removing her jacket, her dark eyes sharpening with interest rather than dismissal. "That's a serious allegation, Mrs. Brown. Would you mind if we talked about that?" They settled in the living room, where Jasmin had arranged her financial documents on the coffee table in anticipation of this moment. Elena's gaze swept the room, taking in the meticulous organization, the clean surfaces, the carefully maintained Victorian furniture that spoke of a woman fully in control of her environment. "Mrs. Brown, I need to ask you some questions about your daily routine and general well-being," Elena said, her tone professional but kind. "Can you tell me about a typical day for you?" Jasmin straightened her shoulders. She had prepared for this interrogation. "I wake at 6:30 every morning and begin with 20 minutes of light exercise, stretches and walking that my doctor recommended for my arthritis. I prepare breakfast, review the morning news, and typically spend the morning hours on household tasks or errands. I grocery shop every Thursday, attend book club every other Wednesday, and volunteer at the literacy center twice a month." Elena made notes on her tablet, but her expression suggested surprise rather than concern. "That sounds like a very structured routine. Do you ever have trouble remembering appointments or managing your medications?" "I take only 2 medications, one for my blood pressure and calcium supplements. I use a pill organizer that I fill every Sunday evening, and I've never missed a dose." Jasmin gestured toward her calendar on the side table. "As you can see, I maintain a detailed schedule of all my activities and appointments." Elena examined the calendar, noting the neat handwriting and careful organization. "Mrs. Brown, the report we received mentioned concerns about financial confusion and accusations of theft. Can you tell me about that?" This was the moment Jasmin had been preparing for. She reached for her evidence notebook and opened it to the first page. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that $15,000 had been taken from my savings account through unauthorized electronic transfers," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I also found that valuable family heirlooms, my grandmother's pearl necklace and my late husband's gold watch, had been removed from my home." Elena leaned forward, her professional demeanor shifting toward genuine interest. "Do you have documentation of these financial irregularities?" Jasmin handed her the bank statements, pointing to the highlighted entries. "These 3 transfers, each for $5,000, were made without my knowledge or consent. I have never authorized electronic transfers from this account." Elena studied the documents carefully, her expression growing increasingly serious. "Have you reported this to your bank?" "I called them the day I discovered the transfers. They told me the transactions were authorized using proper access codes and would require a police report to investigate further." Jasmin's voice carried a note of frustration. "When I tried to file that report, I was told that family members with authorized access can't technically steal from accounts. But do any family members have authorized access to your accounts?" "No," Jasmin said firmly. "Robert and I set up these accounts with only our signatures required. After his death, I never added anyone else." Elena made extensive notes, and Jasmin could see her processing the implications. "Mrs. Brown, you mentioned missing heirlooms. Can you describe those items, and when you last saw them?" Jasmin walked to the bookshelf and pointed to the empty spaces where the jewelry box and watch had been displayed. "My grandmother's pearl necklace was in this leather box, and Robert's father's gold pocket watch sat right here. I clean this room every Tuesday morning, and both items were present last Tuesday. They were gone when I checked on Thursday." "Do you live alone? Who has access to your house?" "I live alone and prefer it that way. My son Marcus has a key for emergencies, as does my daughter Carmen, who lives in Virginia. The housekeeper I used to employ retired 6 months ago, and I haven't replaced her." Jasmin met Elena's eyes directly. "I believe my son Marcus has been systematically stealing from me and has now arranged for me to be declared mentally incompetent to cover his tracks." Elena set down her tablet, her official demeanor softening. "That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Brown. What makes you believe your son is involved?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jasmin told her about Dr. Steinberg's appointment, the pre-prepared legal documents, Marcus's relief at the diagnosis, and his threats about state intervention. Elena listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification, but never suggesting that Jasmin might be confused or mistaken. "Mrs. Brown," Elena said finally, "I need to tell you something. Everything you've described, the financial irregularities, the missing valuables, the rushed medical diagnosis with prepared paperwork, these are classic patterns of elder financial abuse." Jasmin felt a wave of relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "You believe me?" "Not only do I believe you, but I've seen this pattern before." Elena's voice carried a note of anger. "My own grandmother was victimized by a similar scheme 3 years ago. A nephew convinced her doctor to declare her incompetent, then looted her savings account and sold her house." Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the well-maintained garden and carefully tended property. "Mrs. Brown, your home is immaculate, your documentation is thorough, and your mental acuity is obvious. There is absolutely nothing in this assessment that suggests you need protective intervention. Then why was this report filed?" "Because someone wants to create an official record of concern about your mental state," Elena said grimly. "If I had found evidence of self-neglect or confusion, that would support a guardianship petition. But since I haven't, and since you've presented clear evidence of financial crimes, I'm required to file a report with law enforcement." Jasmin felt hope stirring for the first time in weeks. "You'll help me?" Elena returned to her seat and leaned forward earnestly. "Mrs. Brown, what I'm about to say goes beyond my official capacity. The doctor you saw, Dr. Steinberg, his name has come up in other cases. There appears to be a pattern of rushed diagnoses leading to guardianship situations that financially benefit family members. You think this is happening to other people? I know it is. And I think you might be the key to stopping it." Elena paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Would you be willing to seek a second medical opinion? From a neurologist I trust?" "I was planning to do exactly that." "Good. Because if Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis is fraudulent, and based on what you've told me, I suspect it is, we can use that evidence to build a case not just against your son, but against the entire scheme." Elena gathered her things, but left her business card on the coffee table. "Mrs. Brown, I'm going to file a report stating that this welfare check found no evidence of self-neglect or cognitive impairment. In fact, I'm going to note that you appear to be the victim of elder financial abuse and are fully competent to manage your own affairs." As Elena prepared to leave, she turned back with a gentle smile. "My grandmother always said that the best revenge against people who underestimate older women is proving them wrong. I have a feeling you're going to do exactly that." After Elena left, Jasmin returned to Robert's study and opened her evidence notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote Allies, and underneath, Elena Rodriguez, Adult Protective Services. For the first time since discovering the theft, Jasmin didn't feel alone. Someone believed her. Someone understood that her sharp mind and careful documentation weren't signs of obsessive confusion, but evidence of a woman fighting for her life and dignity. She reached for the phone to begin researching neurologists, feeling more determined than ever to prove that the only memory problem in her family belonged to Marcus, who seemed to have forgotten that he had raised his mother to be stronger than he ever imagined. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the study windows, illuminating her notebook where she continued planning her counterattack. Elena had given her more than just professional support. She had given her validation and a path forward. And Jasmin Brown intended to use both. Tilde. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the study windows, illuminating her notebook where she continued planning her counterattack. Elena had given her more than just professional support. She had given her validation and a path forward. 3 days later, Jasmin found herself sitting in Elena's Honda Civic, watching the Baltimore skyline approach as they drove toward Johns Hopkins Hospital. Elena had used her professional network to arrange an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist whose reputation for thorough, ethical diagnoses was legendary among social workers who dealt with elder abuse cases. "Dr. Chen doesn't know anything about your previous diagnosis," Elena said as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. I only told her that you're seeking a comprehensive neurological evaluation for your own peace of mind. Jasmin clutched her purse, which now contained not only her evidence notebook, but also copies of Dr. Steinberg's reports that Marcus had insisted she take home. What if she finds the same things Dr. Steinberg claimed to see? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Elena replied firmly. But Jasmin, I've worked with enough seniors to recognize cognitive decline when I see it. You're as sharp as anyone half your age. The neurology department at Johns Hopkins was a stark contrast to Dr. Steinberg's flashy office. The waiting room was busy but efficient, filled with patients of all ages and families who looked genuinely concerned rather than calculating. When Dr. Sarah Chen emerged to greet them, Jasmin immediately noticed the difference in her demeanor, professional but warm, focused entirely on her patient, rather than scanning the room for family members with agendas. Mrs. Brown, Dr. Chen said, extending her hand with a genuine smile, I understand you're looking for a comprehensive neurological evaluation. That's always a wise decision when you have concerns about your cognitive health. Dr. Chen was younger than Dr. Steinberg, probably in her mid-40s, with an efficient manner that spoke of someone who took medicine seriously. Her office was modest but organized, dominated by actual medical texts rather than impressive diplomas, and she gestured for Jasmin to sit in a comfortable chair that faced her desk directly, rather than being positioned for observers. Now, Mrs. Brown, what brings you here today? Are you experiencing any specific symptoms or concerns? Jasmin had rehearsed this moment with Elena. I recently saw another neurologist who diagnosed me with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis was unexpected, and I'd like a second opinion before making any major life decisions. Dr. Chen made notes on her computer, her expression neutral. I see. Can you tell me about the symptoms that led you to seek that evaluation? I wasn't experiencing symptoms, Jasmin said carefully. My family became concerned about some financial discrepancies in my accounts, and they suggested I see a doctor to rule out any cognitive issues. Financial discrepancies can certainly be a sign of cognitive changes, Dr. Chen acknowledged. Can you describe those issues? Jasmin found herself telling Dr. Chen the same story she had told Elena. The missing money, the stolen heirlooms, her certainty that she was being robbed rather than confused. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification, but never suggesting that Jasmin might be mistaken. That must be very distressing, Dr. Chen said when Jasmin finished. Let's start with a comprehensive cognitive assessment and see what we find. The testing that followed was unlike anything Dr. Steinberg had administered. Dr. Chen spent nearly 2 hours evaluating Jasmin's memory, attention, language skills, and executive function. The tests were challenging but fair, designed to reveal genuine cognitive impairment rather than trip up a nervous patient. Jasmin found herself solving complex puzzles, recalling detailed stories, and demonstrating her ability to plan and organize information. Excellent, Dr. Chen said as she reviewed Jasmin's performance. Your cognitive function appears to be entirely normal for someone your age. In fact, your scores are quite impressive. Jasmin felt a wave of relief, but also apprehension. Dr. Steinberg said my cognitive tests were fine too, but that the brain scan showed problems. Well, let's see what your scans show, Dr. Chen said. I'd like to do a comprehensive MRI with some additional sequences that weren't included in your previous imaging. The MRI appointment was scheduled for the following week, but Dr. Chen wanted to review Dr. Steinberg's previous scans first. Jasmin handed her the CD that had been included in her medical records, watching Dr. Chen's face carefully as she loaded the images onto her computer. Dr. Chen studied the scans for several minutes, occasionally adjusting the contrast or zooming in on specific areas. Her expression grew increasingly puzzled, then concerned. Mrs. Brown, she said finally, I need to ask you some questions about your previous evaluation. Did Dr. Steinberg show you these images directly? Yes, he pointed to dark areas that he said showed brain atrophy. Dr. Chen turned her monitor so Jasmin could see the screen. I'm looking at these scans very carefully, and I'm not seeing the abnormalities that Dr. Steinberg described in his report. She pointed to the areas on the screen. See these regions here? Dr. Steinberg's notes claim these show significant atrophy, but what I'm seeing appears to be normal age-related changes. Nothing that would suggest Alzheimer's disease or any other form of dementia. Kanu. Jasmin leaned forward, studying the grainy, black-and-white images. Are you saying Dr. Steinberg was wrong? I'm saying that these scans don't support his diagnosis. Dr. Chen replied carefully, but I want to do our own imaging to be absolutely certain. A week later, Jasmin returned to Johns Hopkins with Elena for the new MRI. This time, the technician was thorough in explaining each procedure, and Dr. Chen herself reviewed the images as they were taken. The process took nearly 3 hours, but when it was finished, Dr. Chen's smile was unmistakable. Mrs. Brown, your brain scans are completely normal, she announced. No signs of atrophy, no abnormal protein deposits, no structural changes that would suggest any form of dementia. Jasmin felt her knees go weak with relief. You're certain? Absolutely certain. In fact, your brain appears remarkably healthy for someone your age. Dr. Chen pulled up the comparison images on her computer. Look at the difference between Dr. Steinberg's scans and ours. Same patient, same brain, completely different interpretation. Elena leaned forward to examine the images. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, could Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis have been made in good faith? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. The scans that Dr. Steinberg interpreted show absolutely no evidence of Alzheimer's disease. For a qualified neurologist to reach that diagnosis based on these images would represent either gross incompetence or deliberate misdiagnosis. Deliberate misdiagnosis? Jasmin repeated. I'm afraid so. Mrs. Brown, I've reviewed Dr. Steinberg's report thoroughly, and his interpretation of your scans is not just wrong. It's so far from accurate that it couldn't be an honest mistake. Dr. Chen turned to her computer and began typing. I'm preparing a detailed report that contradicts Dr. Steinberg's findings completely. This report will state unequivocally that you show no signs of cognitive impairment or dementia, and that any previous diagnosis to the contrary was medically unfounded. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen handed Jasmin a thick envelope containing her test results, brain scans, and detailed report. Mrs. Brown, I want you to know that I'm also filing a complaint with the Maryland Board of Physicians regarding Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis. What happened to you appears to be medical fraud. Elena drove Jasmin home in thoughtful silence, both women processing the implications of what they had learned. As they pulled into Jasmin's driveway, Elena finally spoke. Jasmin, you have proof now. Dr. Chen's report completely contradicts Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis. Combined with the financial evidence you've documented, this proves that Marcus and Dr. Steinberg have been conspiring to have you declared incompetent. Jasmin held the envelope containing her vindication, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. What do we do now? Now we fight back, Elena said firmly. I'm going to connect you with Detective Michael O'Brien. He specializes in elder abuse cases, and he's going to want to see everything we've gathered. As Elena drove away, Jasmin stood in her driveway holding the medical evidence that proved her sanity and competence. The autumn air was crisp, and the late afternoon light cast long shadows across her well-maintained lawn. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again, not a confused old woman being manipulated by those who should protect her, but a sharp, capable person who had uncovered a criminal conspiracy. Inside her house, she opened her evidence notebook to a new page and wrote "Medical Vindication" at the top. Below that, she carefully documented every detail of her appointment with Dr. Chen, the normal brain scans, and the neurologist's professional opinion that Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis was medically unfounded. Marcus had underestimated her, just as Elena had predicted. He had assumed that an 80-year-old woman would accept whatever authority figures told her, would sign whatever papers were placed in front of her, would surrender her autonomy without a fight. He was about to learn that his mother was far more formidable than he had ever imagined. Jasmin closed her notebook and reached for the phone. It was time to call Detective O'Brien. and turn her evidence over to someone with the power to arrest the people who had tried to steal her life. The war for her independence was far from over, but now she had the ammunition she needed to win it. Jasmin spent the evening organizing Dr. Chen's medical reports alongside her financial documentation, creating an irrefutable case file that proved both her mental competency and the conspiracy against her. She had just sealed the envelope containing copies for Detective O'Brien when she heard the familiar sound of Marcus's truck in her driveway. Through the front window, she watched her son and daughter-in-law approach the house, Marcus carrying what appeared to be moving boxes while Patricia held a clipboard. The sight filled Jasmin with cold fury. They weren't here for a family visit. They were here to pack up her life. She opened the door before they could ring the bell, Dr. Chen's report clutched in her hand like a shield. "Going somewhere?" she asked, blocking their path into the house. Marcus's practiced smile faltered when he saw her expression. "Mom, we've been worried sick about you. Dr. Steinberg called yesterday and said you never came back to sign the power of attorney papers. We thought maybe you were having trouble processing everything. So you brought boxes to help me process?" Jasmin stepped back, allowing them to enter, but her tone made it clear this wasn't a welcome. Patricia bustled past her, setting down the clipboard and surveying the living room with calculating eyes. "Jasmin, honey, we know this is overwhelming. That's why we're here to help you start organizing your things. It's important to make these decisions while you still can." "Still can what?" Jasmin asked quietly. "While you still have some clarity," Marcus said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone she had grown to hate. "The doctor explained that Alzheimer's is progressive. We need to get you into a care facility before things get worse." Jasmin watched them for a moment, noting how Patricia had already begun mentally cataloging the valuable items in the room, while Marcus positioned himself between her and the front door. They had clearly planned this intervention carefully. "I have something to show you both," Jasmin said, opening Dr. Chen's envelope. "A second medical opinion that I sought on my own." Marcus's face went pale. "Mom, what are you talking about? You can't just go doctor shopping until you find someone who tells you what you want to hear." "I didn't doctor shop," Jasmin replied evenly. "I went to Johns Hopkins and had a comprehensive neurological evaluation with Dr. Sarah Chen, one of Maryland's most respected neurologists." She handed Marcus the report, watching his face as he scanned the first page. Patricia moved closer, reading over his shoulder, and Jasmin had the satisfaction of watching both their expressions change, from confidence to confusion to something approaching panic. "This says..." Marcus's voice trailed off as he read Dr. Chen's unequivocal conclusion that Jasmin showed no signs of cognitive impairment or dementia. "It says that Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis was medically unfounded," Jasmin finished. "In fact, Dr. Chen believes it was deliberate medical fraud." Patricia snatched the report from Marcus, her mask of concern finally slipping completely. "This is ridiculous. One doctor's opinion against another's. Dr. Steinberg is a specialist." "Dr. Steinberg is a fraud," Jasmin interrupted. "And you both know it." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus sank into Robert's old chair, still holding one of the moving boxes, while Patricia remained standing, her face cycling through various expressions as she tried to find a new angle of attack. "Mom," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "you have to understand. The gambling debts. Patricia and I, we're going to lose everything. The house, the business, everything Dad worked for." Jasmin stared at her son, shocked by his sudden honesty. "So you decided to steal mine?" "It's not stealing," Patricia burst out. "It's your family. That money should go to Marcus anyway when you die. We're just trying to preserve it, protect it from nursing home costs and medical bills. By having me declared incompetent and institutionalized..." Jasmin's voice was deadly quiet. Marcus looked up at her, and for a moment she saw a flash of the little boy who used to climb into her lap when he was scared. We hoped maybe you actually were getting confused. That would have made this easier, more legitimate. But when you realized I wasn't confused, you went ahead with the scheme anyway." Patricia stepped forward, her voice turning sharp and desperate. Look around you, Jasmin. You're 80 years old, living alone in this huge house. How long before you really do start having problems? How long before you fall down the stairs or forget to turn off the stove? We're trying to help you. By stealing my jewelry, my husband's watch, $15,000 from my accounts? Marcus flinched as if she had slapped him. I needed the money for the lawyers, for Dr. Steinberg. The plan was to pay it all back once we had control of your accounts. What plan? But even as she asked, Jasmin realized she already knew. We were going to put you in that nice assisted living place in Catonsville, Patricia said, as if she were offering a gift. The one with the beautiful gardens. You would have been comfortable there, and we could have used your house sale and savings to pay off our debts and start fresh. And if I refused to go, Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. The guardianship papers would have given us the authority to make that decision for you. The front door opened suddenly, and Carmen's voice called out from the entryway. Mom, Marcus called and said you were having some kind of episode, so I drove up from... Carmen stopped short when she entered the living room, taking in the scene. The moving boxes, Patricia's guilty expression, Marcus slumped in defeat, and her mother standing rigid with fury. What's going on here? Carmen demanded. Marcus straightened up, his face brightening with false hope. Carmen, thank God you're here. Mom's gotten some kind of second opinion that contradicts her Alzheimer's diagnosis, and now she's making wild accusations about theft and fraud. Carmen looked from Marcus to their mother, her nurse's training evident in the way she assessed the situation. What kind of accusations? Jasmin handed her daughter Dr. Chen's report, watching Carmen's face carefully as she read. Carmen had always been the most perceptive of her children, the one who could see through Marcus's charm when they were young. This report says you don't have dementia, Carmen said slowly. That's right. But Marcus said Dr. Steinberg found clear evidence of Alzheimer's. Dr. Steinberg lied, Jasmin said simply. In exchange for money from your brother. Carmen looked at Marcus, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Marcus, please tell me Mom is wrong. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. Patricia stepped into the breach, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. Carmen, you have to understand how desperate we were. Marcus lost everything, and we were about to lose the house. Your mother has more money than she'll ever need, sitting alone in this big house. You tried to have our mother declared incompetent to steal her money? Carmen's voice was barely controlled. It's not stealing when it's family, Patricia snapped. She's going to die anyway, and then what? The state takes half of it in taxes? Carmen turned to Marcus, tears beginning to form in her eyes. She's our mother, Marcus. How could you do this to her? Marcus finally looked up, and Jasmin saw genuine remorse in his face for the first time. I know how it looks, Carmen. But we were desperate. I thought maybe if she really was getting confused, it would be better for everyone if we took care of things before she got worse. But she's not confused, Carmen shouted. She's completely competent, and you tried to have her locked up anyway. Marcus stood up slowly, the moving box falling from his lap. Carmen, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. The gambling debts, the failed business ventures. Patricia and we've been drowning for months. So you decided to drown Mom too? Carmen's voice broke. Patricia made one last desperate attempt. Carmen, be practical. Your mother can't live alone forever. Eventually, she will need care, and when that happens, it will be her decision to make, Carmen interrupted. Not yours, not Marcus's, not anyone else's. Marcus walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry, Mom. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. Sorry you got caught, or sorry you tried to destroy my life? Jasmin asked. Marcus paused at the doorway, not turning around. Both, I guess. Patricia gathered her clipboard and moved toward the door, but turned back with a final venomous look. This isn't over, Jasmin. Just because you found one doctor willing to contradict a specialist doesn't mean you've won anything. There are other ways to handle stubborn old women who won't listen to reason. The threat hung in the air as they left, Marcus carrying his empty moving boxes back to the truck, while Patricia walked with the rigid posture of someone planning revenge. Carmen stood in the living room, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother drive away. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Marcus was capable of something like this." Jasmin put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I know, sweetheart, I know. What are you going to do?" Jasmin looked at Dr. Chen's report, then at her evidence notebook lying open on the coffee table. "I'm going to call Detective O'Brien tomorrow morning. Marcus was right about one thing. This isn't over. But it's not going to end the way he thinks." Carmen nodded, wiping her eyes. "Do you want me to stay tonight? I don't like the idea of you being alone after Patricia's threat." "I'll be fine," Jasmin said, though she appreciated the offer. "But Carmen, thank you for choosing the truth over family loyalty. That couldn't have been easy." "Oh, it was the easiest choice I've ever made," Carmen replied firmly. "You're my mother, and you deserve better than this." As Carmen prepared to drive back to Virginia with promises to return for the weekend, Jasmin stood in her doorway watching the autumn darkness settle over her neighborhood. The confrontation had gone better than she had hoped. Marcus's admission of guilt was more than she had expected, and Carmen's support meant everything. But Patricia's parting threat echoed in her mind. The woman was desperate and calculating, and desperate people were dangerous. Jasmin closed and locked her front door, then walked to Robert's study, where she opened her evidence notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote Marcus's confession and began documenting everything he had admitted during their confrontation. Tomorrow, she would call Detective O'Brien and turn over all her evidence. Tonight, she would prepare for whatever Patricia might try next. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Jasmin felt like she was winning. The fluorescent lights in Detective Michael O'Brien's office cast harsh shadows across the stacks of case files that covered every available surface. Jasmin sat in the worn leather chair across from his desk, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Elena Rodriguez occupied the chair beside her. The walls were lined with certificates, commendations, and photographs of O'Brien with various community groups, testament to his 15 years specializing in crimes against the elderly. "Mrs. Brown," O'Brien said, his weathered face serious as he reviewed the documents spread before him, "what you've brought me here represents one of the most systematic cases of elder abuse I've seen in my career." His fingers traced the financial records Elena had helped Jasmin organize, stopping at each highlighted discrepancy. $15,000 in unauthorized transfers, missing heirlooms, a fraudulent medical diagnosis. This isn't impulsive behavior. This is calculated. Jasmin felt a chill run down her spine despite the office's stuffiness. Hearing the scope of the conspiracy laid out in such clinical terms made the betrayal feel even more profound. "I keep thinking there must be some explanation," she said quietly. "Some way this isn't what it appears to be." O'Brien leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes compassionate but unflinching. "Mrs. Brown, I've been investigating financial crimes against seniors for over a decade. What your son and daughter-in-law have done follows a pattern I've seen too many times. They've targeted you because they believe you're vulnerable, because they think no one will believe you over them." He paused, studying her face. "But they made a critical error. They underestimated you." Elena shifted forward in her chair. "Detective, what are the next steps? Mrs. Brown has been living with this uncertainty for weeks now, and we need to move quickly before they can do any more damage." O'Brien nodded, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "First, we need to secure your assets immediately. I'll contact the bank and provide them with a copy of Dr. Chen's report. That should freeze any accounts Marcus or Patricia might have access to." He made notes as he spoke, his handwriting precise despite the speed. "Second, we need to document everything. Every missing item, every suspicious transaction, every interaction you've had with Dr. Steinberg. I've been keeping detailed records. Jasmin said, reaching into her purse to retrieve a small notebook. It's something I learned from my years as a librarian. Document everything. O'Brien smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. That's exactly what I like to hear. Documentation is the backbone of any solid case. He accepted the notebook and flipped through pages of Jasmin's careful handwriting. This is excellent work. You've noted dates, times, amounts, even emotional context. This will be invaluable. The detective's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the display with a frown. Excuse me for a moment, he said, answering the call. O'Brien here. His expression darkened as he listened. When was this filed? I see. Yes, I'll need copies of all the paperwork immediately. Jasmin felt her stomach clench as she watched O'Brien's face. Elena reached over and squeezed her hand reassuringly. Mrs. Brown, O'Brien said as he hung up, I'm afraid your son has escalated the situation. He filed for emergency guardianship this morning, claiming you're a danger to yourself and others. The words hit Jasmin like a physical blow. A danger? How can he claim that? According to the filing, he's alleging that you've been making wild accusations against family members, that you've been confused about financial matters, and that you've been behaving erratically. O'Brien's jaw tightened. He's also submitted Dr. Steinberg's fraudulent diagnoses as evidence of your mental incapacity. Elena's face flushed with anger. This is exactly what abusers do when they're backed into a corner. They escalate and try to discredit their victims. Exactly, O'Brien agreed. But here's what your son doesn't know. We have Dr. Chen's report directly contradicting Steinberg's diagnosis. More importantly, my investigation has uncovered something else. He pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. Dr. Richard Steinberg has been running this same scam on other elderly patients. Jasmin's eyes widened. Other patients? 3 other cases in the past 18 months. All elderly individuals with substantial assets. All received sudden Alzheimer's diagnoses from Dr. Steinberg. All had family members who gained financial control shortly afterward. O'Brien's voice carried the weight of contained fury. In each case, the families paid Steinberg a substantial, quote, consultation fee for his services. My God, Jasmin whispered. How many lives has he destroyed? We're still investigating, but I suspect there are more victims we haven't identified yet. O'Brien stood and walked to a whiteboard covered in case notes. The good news is that this pattern of behavior will work in our favor. It shows this wasn't an isolated incident of medical misjudgment, it's systematic fraud. Elena leaned forward. What about the guardianship hearing? When will that take place? Emergency guardianship hearings are typically scheduled within 72 hours of filing. Given that this was filed this morning, we're looking at Thursday or Friday. O'Brien returned to his desk and pulled out his phone. I need to contact the district attorney's office immediately. We need to get criminal charges filed before the guardianship hearing. Criminal charges? Jasmin's voice was barely a whisper. O'Brien's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Brown, I understand this is your son we're talking about. But what he's done, what all of them have done, is criminal. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, theft. These aren't civil matters that can be resolved with family counseling. These are serious crimes that require prosecution. Jasmin closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 52 years of motherhood pressing down on her. She thought of Marcus as a little boy, coming home from school with scraped knees and broken toys, looking to her to fix everything. Now she was the one who needed fixing, and he was the one who had broken her. I know it's difficult, Elena said gently, but you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for all the other elderly people who might become victims if this pattern continues. O'Brien nodded. Elena's right. By standing up for yourself, you're protecting others. That takes real courage, Mrs. Brown. What happens next? Jasmin asked, opening her eyes and straightening her shoulders. Next, we prepare for war, O'Brien said grimly. Your son has excellent legal representation. I recognize the firm name from the filing. They specialize in elder law and guardianship cases. They're going to present you as a confused, paranoid elderly woman who needs protection from herself. But we have the medical evidence, Elena protested. We do, and that's our strongest asset. But we need more than medical evidence. We need to show the court that this guardianship petition is part of a larger pattern of abuse. O'Brien picked up his phone again. I'm calling Dr. Chen to arrange for her to testify. We'll also need Elena to provide professional testimony about the signs of elder abuse she observed. I'll do whatever is necessary, Elena said firmly. Mrs. Brown, O'Brien continued, I need you to understand that this is going to get worse before it gets better. Your son and his wife are going to fight dirty. They're going to try to paint you as unstable, forgetful, paranoid. They might even try to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation. Jasmin felt a chill of fear. Can they do that? They can try, but with Dr. Chen's report and our documentation, it would be difficult for them to succeed. Still, you need to be prepared for anything. O'Brien's expression was serious. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Someone who can be with you? Carmen, Jasmin said suddenly. My daughter, Carmen. She was confused by Marcus's claims, but when I showed her the medical evidence, she started asking questions. She's been calling me every day since. Good. I think we need to bring Carmen into this fully. If she's willing to testify about her observations of the family dynamics, it could be crucial. O'Brien made another note. What about your living situation? Are you safe at home? I've been staying with a friend from my book club, Jasmin said. Margaret Chen. She's Dr. Chen's aunt, actually. She insisted I stay with her until this is resolved. O'Brien smiled. Dr. Chen's aunt? That's actually perfect. It shows you have a support network and aren't isolated. That will work in our favor. Elena glanced at her watch. Detective, what's our timeline here? The guardianship hearing is in 3 days at most. We work around the clock, O'Brien said simply. I'll have criminal charges filed by tomorrow morning. That should give the judge pause about granting guardianship. It's hard to argue someone needs protection when the person asking for guardianship is facing criminal charges. And if the judge grants the guardianship anyway? Jasmin asked. O'Brien's face was grim. Then we appeal immediately and hope the criminal charges give us enough leverage to get the decision overturned quickly. The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled over them. Jasmin looked around at Elena and Detective O'Brien, these two people who had become her advocates in a fight she never imagined she'd have to wage. Detective, she said finally, there's something else I need to tell you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small voice recorder. I recorded my last conversation with Marcus. When I confronted him about the missing money, I thought it might be important. O'Brien's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Brown, that could be extremely valuable. What did he say? He admitted to taking the money, but he claimed it was for my own good. He said I was too old to manage my own finances and that he was protecting me from myself. Jasmin's voice grew stronger. He also said that Dr. Steinberg had confirmed his suspicions about my mental state. That's direct evidence of conspiracy, O'Brien said, his excitement barely contained. Mrs. Brown, this recording could be the key to everything. With this, we can show the court that the guardianship petition is part of a deliberate scheme to defraud you. Elena smiled for the first time all day. You really are a librarian, aren't you? You documented everything. 43 years of training, Jasmin said with a small smile. I learned to keep thorough records of everything, especially when people were trying to take advantage of the library's resources. O'Brien stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Baltimore County Courthouse visible in the distance. Mrs. Brown, I want you to know that we're going to fight this with everything we have. What's happening to you isn't just a family matter. It's a crime against one of our most vulnerable populations. You deserve justice, and more importantly, you deserve to live your life on your own terms. Jasmin felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of determination rather than despair. Detective, I've spent the last 5 years learning to live without my husband. I've learned to be strong in ways I never thought possible. I won't let my own son take that strength away from me. Good, O'Brien said, turning back to face her, because we're going to need every bit of that strength for what's coming. Your son has made a serious mistake. He's underestimated the woman who raised him. Let's make sure he learns exactly what that means. As they prepared to leave O'Brien's office, Jasmin felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over her. It was the same feeling she'd had when facing difficult patrons at the library, or when advocating for increased funding for literacy programs. She had fought for others her entire career. Now it was time to fight for herself. The battle for her life, her dignity, and her future was about to begin in earnest. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Baltimore County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floor as Jasmin walked toward courtroom 3B. The battle for her life, her dignity, and her future was about to begin in earnest, and now, just 48 hours later, that battle had arrived at its most crucial moment. Elena Rodriguez walked beside her, carrying a briefcase filled with the evidence they'd painstakingly assembled. Detective O'Brien had worked through the night to coordinate with the district attorney's office, and criminal charges had been filed against Marcus, Patricia, and Dr. Steinberg just hours before the guardianship hearing was scheduled to begin. "Remember," Elena whispered as they approached the courtroom doors, "you are not on trial here. Your competency is not in question. The question is whether your son's petition has any merit. And we know it doesn't." Jasmin nodded, smoothing her navy blue suit, the same one she'd worn to Robert's funeral 5 years ago. She'd chosen it deliberately, wanting to project dignity and competence. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding respect in professional settings. The courtroom was already filling with people. Marcus sat at the petitioner's table with his attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit. Patricia was beside him, her face a mask of false concern. Jasmin was struck by how haggard Marcus looked. His usually perfectly styled hair was unkempt, and his skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting stress. Carmen sat in the gallery, her face pale but determined. She'd driven down from Virginia the night before, and Jasmin had seen the tears in her daughter's eyes when she'd learned the full scope of Marcus's betrayal. Dr. Chen sat nearby, her medical bag at her feet, ready to testify about the fraudulent diagnosis. Detective O'Brien occupied a seat near the back, his notepad open, still gathering evidence even as the hearing began. "All rise," the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Maria Martinez presiding. Judge Martinez was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She took her seat at the bench and reviewed the files before her with the methodical attention of someone who understood that people's lives hung in the balance of her decisions. "Be seated," she said. "We're here today for the matter of Marcus Brown versus Jasmin Brown, petitioning for emergency guardianship." She looked directly at Marcus's attorney. "Counselor Williams, you may present your opening statement." Attorney Williams rose gracefully, her voice smooth and professional. "Your Honor, we are here today because a loving son is desperately concerned about his elderly mother's welfare. Mrs. Jasmin Brown, at 80 years old, has been exhibiting signs of severe cognitive decline that put her at risk of financial exploitation and personal harm." Jasmin felt her jaw clench as Williams continued, painting a picture of a confused, paranoid woman who had lost touch with reality. The medical evidence, provided by respected neurologist Dr. Richard Steinberg, clearly shows early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Mrs. Brown has been making wild accusations against her own family members, claiming they've stolen from her. She's been hoarding money and refusing to maintain her home properly. Furthermore, Williams continued, Mrs. Brown has been taken advantage of by individuals who claim to be helping her, but are actually encouraging her paranoid delusions. We ask the court to grant emergency guardianship to protect Mrs. Brown from herself and from those who would exploit her condition. Elena stood as Williams sat down. Your Honor, my name is Elena Rodriguez, and I represent Mrs. Brown in this matter. What we have here is not a case of cognitive decline. It's a case of elder abuse perpetrated by the very people who claim to love Mrs. Brown. Elena's voice carried the passion of someone who had seen too many elderly people victimized by their own families. Mrs. Brown is not suffering from Alzheimer's disease. She is suffering from systematic financial theft, medical fraud, and emotional abuse. The medical diagnosis presented by the petitioner is fraudulent, and we have independent medical evidence to prove it. Quote, Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly. Ms. Rodriguez, those are serious allegations. I assume you have evidence to support these claims? We do, Your Honor. We have comprehensive medical examinations conducted by Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected neurologist, showing that Mrs. Brown has no cognitive impairment whatsoever. We have financial records documenting unauthorized transfers of funds. We have evidence of a conspiracy involving Dr. Steinberg and other elderly victims. And we have Mrs. Brown herself, who will demonstrate to this court that she is completely competent to manage her own affairs. The first witness called was Dr. Steinberg himself. Jasmin watched as he took the stand, his silver hair neatly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. He looked every inch the distinguished physician, but Jasmin could see the nervousness in his eyes as he was sworn in. Dr. Steinberg, Attorney Williams began, please tell the court about your examination of Mrs. Brown. I conducted a comprehensive neurological evaluation of Mrs. Brown on October 15th, Steinberg said, his voice steady but carefully controlled. Based on my examination and brain imaging, I concluded that she was showing clear signs of early-stage Alzheimer's disease. And what led you to that conclusion? Mrs. Brown exhibited confusion about recent events, difficulty with memory tasks, and showed signs of paranoid ideation. The brain scans confirmed structural changes consistent with Alzheimer's pathology. Elena rose for cross-examination, her expression sharp. Dr. Steinberg, in your examination of Mrs. Brown, did you spend more than 30 minutes with her? The examination was thorough but efficient. Please answer the question. Did you spend more than 30 minutes examining Mrs. Brown? Steinberg's jaw tightened. No, but... And the brain scans you referenced in your diagnosis. Did you personally review them? I reviewed the radiologist's report. Dr. Steinberg, are you aware that you are currently under investigation for fraudulent medical practices? Williams objected, but Judge Martinez allowed the question. Steinberg's face flushed. I am aware of certain misunderstandings about my practice. Misunderstandings, Elena repeated. Dr. Steinberg, how many elderly patients have you diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in the past 2 years? I don't have those numbers readily available. Your Honor, we have evidence showing that Dr. Steinberg has diagnosed at least 15 elderly patients with Alzheimer's disease in the past 18 months. All patients whose families subsequently gained control of their assets. The courtroom murmured, and Judge Martinez called for order. Dr. Steinberg's composure was cracking visibly. Dr. Chen was called next, and her testimony was devastating to Marcus's case. She presented clear brain scans showing no signs of cognitive impairment, detailed cognitive assessments demonstrating Jasmin's mental acuity, and professional opinions directly contradicting Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis. In my professional opinion, Dr. Chen said firmly, Mrs. Brown shows no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or any other cognitive impairment. She is mentally competent and fully capable of managing her own affairs. Carmen was called as a witness, and Jasmin watched her daughter take the stand with tears in her eyes. Carmen's voice shook as she testified about her observations of Marcus's behavior, his financial problems, and his increasing pressure on their mother. I believed my brother's claims at first, Carmen said, her voice barely above a whisper. But when I saw the medical evidence, when I really looked at how sharp and organized my mother was, I realized I'd been deceived. Marcus has been lying to all of us. Marcus himself was called to testify, and Jasmin watched her eldest son take the stand with a mixture of heartbreak and steel determination. His attorney tried to maintain the narrative of a concerned son, but Elena's cross-examination was relentless. Mr. Brown, you've accumulated significant gambling debts in the past 2 years, haven't you? I've had some financial difficulties, but... Difficulties totaling over $200,000, correct? Marcus's face reddened. My personal finances have nothing to do with my mother's condition. Don't they? Elena pulled out the voice recording device. Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording of a conversation between Mr. Brown and his mother, made just 1 week ago. The courtroom fell silent as Jasmin's voice filled the air, confronting Marcus about the missing money, Then came Marcus's response, his voice clear and incriminating. "I took the money for your own good, Mom." Dr. Steinberg confirmed what I already knew. "You're too old to manage your own finances. I'm protecting you from yourself." The impact was immediate and devastating. Marcus's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury could hear the manipulation, the admission of theft, the callous disregard for his mother's autonomy. Finally, Judge Martinez called Jasmin herself to the stand. As she walked to the witness chair, Jasmin felt the weight of 80 years of life experience settling on her shoulders. She thought of Robert, of the children she'd raised, of the decades she'd spent serving her community as a librarian. "Mrs. Brown," Elena began gently, "please tell the court about your current living situation." "I live independently in the home my husband and I bought 43 years ago," Jasmin said, her voice clear and strong. "I manage my own finances, maintain my own household, and volunteer at the local literacy center twice a week." "Mrs. Brown, are you suffering from any cognitive impairment?" "No, I am not," Jasmin replied firmly. "I am mentally competent, physically capable, and fully aware of what my son has done to me." The cross-examination was brutal, with Williams trying to paint Jasmin as confused and paranoid. But Jasmin answered every question with calm precision, demonstrating the sharp intellect that had made her a respected librarian for over 4 decades. "Mrs. Brown," Williams said, "isn't it true that you've been making wild accusations against your own family members?" "I have been documenting theft and fraud," Jasmin replied evenly. "If stating facts about criminal behavior constitutes wild accusations, then I suppose I am guilty as charged." When the testimony concluded, Judge Martinez called for a brief recess. Jasmin sat in the gallery, surrounded by Elena, Carmen, and the support network that had rallied around her. She felt emotionally drained, but also strangely empowered. She had spoken her truth, and now the decision rested with the court. Judge Martinez returned and took her seat. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented today, and I want to address something directly. This court sees cases of elder abuse all too frequently, and we also see cases where family members genuinely need protection. The question before me is which situation we're dealing with here." She looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Brown, the evidence presented today paints a disturbing picture of financial exploitation and medical fraud. The recording of your conversation with your mother is particularly damning." Then she turned to Jasmin. "Mrs. Brown, I have observed your testimony carefully, and I find no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your responses were clear, coherent, and demonstrated excellent recall and reasoning ability." Judge Martinez's voice grew stern. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering that all financial controls be immediately returned to Mrs. Brown, and I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution." The courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval and gasps of shock. Jasmin felt tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, vindication, and yes, even grief for the son she felt she had lost. As the gavel fell, she realized that while she had won this battle, the war for her family's healing was only just beginning. The gavel's echo still resonated in Jasmin's ears as she sat in the courthouse hallway, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just transpired. Judge Martinez's decisive ruling had not only denied Marcus's guardianship petition, but had also validated everything Jasmin had endured over the past months. The relief was so profound it felt almost physical, like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had suddenly been lifted from her shoulders. Elena sat beside her, quietly organizing the documents they'd presented as evidence. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently, studying Jasmin's face with the careful attention of someone who understood that victory in such cases often came with complicated emotions. "Vindicated," Jasmin said slowly, "but also heartbroken. I keep thinking about Marcus as a little boy, how proud he was when he learned to tie his shoes, how he used to help me in the garden." She paused, watching courthouse staff hurry past with their own cases and crises. "I never imagined I'd have to fight my own son in court to prove I'm competent to live my own life." Carmen appeared in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. She approached hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome after months of supporting Marcus's version of events. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen what was happening. I should have believed you from the beginning." Jasmin looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw the genuine remorse in Carmen's eyes. "You were manipulated. Just like I was," she said, reaching out to take Carmen's hand. "Marcus has always been charming when he wanted something. The important thing is that you found the courage to speak the truth when it mattered." Detective O'Brien approached them, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and professional concern. "Mrs. Brown, I wanted to let you know that we've arrested Marcus, Patricia, and Dr. Steinberg. They're being processed now on charges of elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and theft." The words hit Jasmin like a physical blow. Despite everything Marcus had done, despite the betrayal and the lies, hearing that her son was in custody felt like a knife to her heart. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There'll be a criminal trial," O'Brien explained. "Given the evidence we've gathered, the financial records, the voice recording, Dr. Chen's testimony, and now the pattern of fraud we've uncovered with Dr. Steinberg, the district attorney is confident about securing convictions." Elena shifted in her chair. "What about the other victims? The elderly patients Dr. Steinberg defrauded?" "We're reaching out to them now," O'Brien said. "Mrs. Brown's case has opened the door to a much larger investigation. We believe there may be as many as 20 victims over the past 3 years." Jasmin felt a surge of purpose despite her personal pain. "Detective, I want to help however I can. If my speaking out can help other families avoid what I've been through, then something good can come from this nightmare." "I was hoping you'd say that," O'Brien replied. "Your testimony will be crucial not just in your own case, but in building cases for the other victims. Many of them are afraid to come forward, afraid their families won't believe them." Carmen squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, I want to help too. I want to understand how I missed the signs, how I let Marcus convince me you were declining. Maybe I can talk to other family members who are in the position I was in." Elena nodded approvingly. "That's actually a brilliant idea. Sometimes people are more willing to listen to someone who's been through the same experience they have." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Jasmin noticed Marcus being led away in handcuffs by 2 officers. Their eyes met for a moment across the corridor, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse mixed with shame. Marcus mouthed, "I'm sorry," before being led away, and despite everything, Jasmin felt her heart break a little more. "He's still my son," she said to Elena as they walked toward the parking garage. "I hate what he did, but I can't stop loving him." "That's what makes you a good mother," Elena replied. "And it's also what makes elder abuse within families so devastating. The victims are torn between seeking justice and protecting the people who hurt them." 3 hours later, Jasmin sat in her restored Victorian home for the first time in weeks. Margaret Chen had driven her back from the courthouse, and now Jasmin moved through rooms that felt both familiar and foreign. Everything looked the same, but the violation of trust had changed how she experienced her own space. The phone rang, and Jasmin answered to hear Detective O'Brien's voice. "Mrs. Brown, I wanted to update you on the financial situation. The court has ordered the immediate return of all funds taken from your accounts. You should see the money restored within 24 hours. "What about my grandmother's pearl necklace and Robert's watch?" Jasmin asked. "We found them in Patricia's possession when we executed the search warrant. They'll be returned to you once they're processed as evidence, but that should be within the week." That evening, Carmen stayed for dinner, and they sat in the kitchen where Jasmin had fed her children thousands of meals over the years. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions and regrets. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," Carmen said finally. "Marcus's gambling, the way he'd get angry when anyone questioned him about money, how he started talking about your condition right around the time his construction business failed." Jasmin nodded. "I think he convinced himself that he was protecting me, that taking my money was somehow justified because I was too old to manage it properly. People can rationalize almost anything when they're desperate. But Mom, how do we move forward? How do we function as a family when Marcus... Carmen's voice trailed off. I don't know, Jasmin admitted. I've been thinking about that since the hearing ended. Marcus will likely go to prison, and he'll need support when he gets out. But I also can't pretend that what he did was acceptable. Carmen reached across the table and took her mother's hand. Maybe we start with the two of us. Maybe we rebuild what we can, and leave room for Marcus to earn his way back into our lives if he's willing to do the work. The next morning brought a parade of visitors. Elena arrived with paperwork for the additional security measures they'd discussed for Jasmin's accounts. Dr. Chen stopped by to check on her patient and friend. Detective O'Brien called with updates on the expanding investigation, but the most significant visitor was a woman in her 70s named Ruth Goldstein, who had been one of Dr. Steinberg's other victims. Elena had connected them, and Ruth had driven over from Annapolis to meet the woman whose courage had exposed the conspiracy. My daughter convinced me I was losing my mind, Ruth said, sitting in Jasmin's living room with a cup of tea. Dr. Steinberg said I had dementia, and suddenly I couldn't access my own bank accounts. I thought I was going crazy. How long were you under guardianship? Jasmin asked. 8 months. 8 months of being treated like a child, of having my daughter control every aspect of my life. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. When Detective O'Brien called me about your case, I couldn't believe someone else had been through the same thing. What will you do now? Fight, Ruth said with unexpected steel in her voice. I'm going to get my money back, and I'm going to make sure my daughter faces consequences for what she did. Your courage gave me the strength to speak up. As Ruth left, Jasmin realized that her personal victory had become something much larger. She thought about the 20 other victims Detective O'Brien had mentioned, about the families torn apart by greed and manipulation, about the elderly people who had been silenced and dismissed. That afternoon, she called Elena. I want to do more than just testify in court, she said. I want to start a support group for elder abuse survivors. I want to speak at senior centers about the warning signs. I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Are you sure you're ready for that? Elena asked. The criminal trial hasn't even started yet. I'm ready, Jasmin said firmly. For the first time in months, I feel like I have a purpose again. Marcus tried to steal my independence, my dignity, my voice. Well, I'm going to use that voice to help other people. Elena's voice was warm with approval. Then let's get started. I know exactly where to begin. As evening fell, Jasmin stood in Robert's old study, surrounded by the financial documents and legal papers that had become the weapons in her fight for justice. The room felt different now, not just like a memorial to her late husband, but like a command center for her new mission. She thought about Marcus, probably sitting in a jail cell, finally facing the consequences of his choices. She thought about Carmen, working to rebuild their relationship. She thought about Ruth and the other victims who were finding their voices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The media attention that was already building, the preparations for the criminal trial, the work of building a support network for other survivors. But tonight, for the first time in months, Jasmin Brown felt like herself again. She was no longer just a victim of elder abuse. She was a survivor, an advocate, and a force for change. And she was just getting started. 6 months after Judge Martinez's ruling, Jasmin stood at the podium in the Towson Community Center, looking out at an audience of 37 seniors and their adult children. The room was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional rustle of papers. She had given this presentation 12 times now, but her heart still raced before each one. My name is Jasmin Brown, she began, her voice steady despite the familiar flutter of nerves. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a courtroom defending my right to live independently, fighting accusations from my own son that I was mentally incompetent. Today, I want to share my story with you, not for sympathy, but so you can recognize the warning signs that I initially missed. In the front row, Elena Rodriguez sat with her ever-present notebook, documenting feedback and questions that arose during these presentations. They had refined the talk through repetition, but Elena still insisted on capturing every nuance that might help them reach more people. Elder abuse doesn't look like what you see in movies, Jasmin continued. It's not always physical violence or obvious neglect. Often it's subtle manipulation by people we trust completely. It starts with small things. A family member expressing concern about your memory, suggesting you might be getting confused about finances, offering to help manage your affairs. A woman in the third row raised her hand. My daughter keeps telling me I'm forgetting things, but I know I'm not. She wants me to sign papers giving her power of attorney. Should I be worried? Jasmin felt a familiar pang of recognition. What matters is how you feel about your own mental state. If you're confident in your abilities, trust that instinct. Seek an independent medical evaluation if there are genuine concerns. And never, ever sign legal documents under pressure. After the presentation, Jasmin found herself surrounded by people with questions, concerns, and stories. Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 70s, approached with tears in her eyes. My son has been pressuring me to sell my house and move in with his family. He says I can't manage on my own anymore, but I feel fine. I just don't know what to do. Would you like to come to our support group? Jasmin asked, handing her a card. It meets every Tuesday evening at my house. We're a small group of people who've been through similar situations. Sometimes it helps to talk with others who understand. The support group had started 3 months ago with just Jasmin, Ruth Goldstein, and 2 other women Elena had connected them with. Now it had grown to 8 regular members, all survivors of various forms of elder abuse. They met in Jasmin's living room, the same room where she'd once sat isolated and confused, wondering if she was losing her mind. As the community center emptied, Carmen appeared at Jasmin's side. Her daughter had driven down from Virginia for the presentation, something she'd done for each of the past 4 talks. Mom, you were incredible today. I could see how much your words meant to people. It feels good to turn something so horrible into something helpful, Jasmin replied, gathering her materials. Though I never imagined I'd be speaking publicly about such personal matters. Elena joined them, her notebook filled with observations. Jasmin, I think tonight's audience was the most engaged we've had. 3 people asked about the support group, and 5 others requested information about getting second medical opinions. Have you heard anything about the criminal trial? Carmen asked as they walked to the parking lot. Detective O'Brien called yesterday, Jasmin said. Marcus's attorney is pushing for a plea deal. Apparently, facing the possibility of a public trial has made him more willing to admit his guilt. Carmen was quiet for a moment. Have you decided whether you'll attend the sentencing hearing? I'm not sure, Jasmin admitted. Part of me wants to be there, to see justice done. But another part of me... She paused, searching for words. I'm afraid of what I'll feel when I see him in that situation. He's still my son, despite everything. You don't have to decide now, Elena said gently. But if you do go, you won't be alone. The support group will be there, Carmen will be there, and I'll be there. At home that evening, Jasmin sat in Robert's study, which had become her unofficial office for the advocacy work. The desk was covered with correspondence from other elder abuse survivors, invitations to speak at senior centers, and materials for the newsletter she'd started publishing monthly. The phone rang, and she answered to hear a voice she didn't recognize. Mrs. Brown? My name is Margaret Foster. I got your number from Detective O'Brien. I think my family is doing to me what your son did to you. Jasmin's heart clenched. Tell me what's happening, Margaret. My daughter-in-law convinced me to see a doctor about my memory. The doctor says I have dementia, but I don't feel confused. I feel fine. But now they're talking about moving me to assisted living, and they've started managing my checkbook. Margaret's voice was shaky but determined. I found an article about your case online. It sounded so familiar. Margaret, do you have someone you trust? Someone who isn't part of your immediate family? My neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She's been wondering about all this too. Jasmin's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Chen? Margaret, is this Margaret Foster? Do you live on Maple Street? Yes, how did you? Margaret, Mrs. Chen is my friend. She's Dr. Sarah Chen's aunt. You're not alone in this, and you're not crazy. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'd like to introduce you to some people who can help. After hanging up, Jasmin felt the familiar mixture of anger and determination that had sustained her through her own battle. Each new case reinforced her belief that what had happened to her was part of a much larger problem that society had largely ignored. She picked up her pen and began writing in the journal she'd kept since the support group started. "Tonight I met another victim," she wrote. "Margaret Foster, age 78, same pattern as mine. Fraudulent medical diagnosis, family pressure, financial control. But unlike me, she reached out for help early. Maybe we can prevent her from going through what I endured." The next morning brought a visit from Detective O'Brien, who had news about the broader investigation. "We've now identified 23 victims of Dr. Steinberg's scheme," he reported, sitting in Jasmin's kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Your case was the key that unlocked all the others. What's happened to the other families involved?" 18 criminal cases have been filed. Most of the family members involved are pleading guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. The financial recovery has been substantial, over $2.3 million returned to victims so far. Jasmin felt a surge of satisfaction. "And Dr. Steinberg?" "He's agreed to surrender his medical license and testify against the other conspirators in exchange for a lighter sentence. He's also agreed to provide psychological evaluations for all the victims to document the emotional damage caused by his fraud." "What about the victims themselves? How are they coping?" O'Brien's expression grew thoughtful. "That's actually why I'm here. Several of them have asked specifically about your support group. They want to know how to start similar groups in their communities." "I'd be happy to help," Jasmin said immediately. "Elena and I have been documenting what works and what doesn't. We could create a guide for starting support groups." "There's something else," O'Brien continued. "The Maryland legislature is considering new laws to strengthen protections for elderly people against financial abuse. They've asked if you'd be willing to testify about your experience." Jasmin felt a thrill of purpose. "Of course. When?" "Next month. The committee wants to hear from actual victims, not just experts and advocates." After O'Brien left, Jasmin called Elena to share the news. "We're going to Annapolis," she said. "It's time to make sure other people have better protections than I did." That afternoon, Ruth Goldstein stopped by for tea, a ritual they'd established since meeting. Ruth's own case had been resolved successfully, with her daughter facing criminal charges and Ruth regaining control of her finances. "I have news," Ruth said, settling into her chair with obvious excitement. "My grandson called yesterday. He's in his second year of law school, and he wants to specialize in elder law. He says our cases inspired him to want to help protect elderly people." "That's wonderful," Jasmin said. "It's amazing how something so terrible can inspire the next generation to do better." "Speaking of the next generation," Ruth continued, "have you heard from Marcus recently?" Jasmin's expression grew complicated. "His attorney says he wants to write me a letter, but I haven't decided if I'm ready to read it. I know I'll have to face him eventually, but I'm still processing everything." "There's no rush," Ruth said gently. "Forgiveness isn't something that can be forced or scheduled. It happens when you're ready, if you're ready." That evening, as Jasmin prepared for bed, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a victim, isolated and confused, doubting her own sanity. Now she was an advocate, a leader, a voice, for people who had been silenced by those they trusted most. She thought about Margaret Foster, whom she'd be meeting tomorrow. She thought about the legislative hearing where she'd tell her story to lawmakers. She thought about the support group members who had become like family to her, bound together by shared trauma and mutual healing. Most surprisingly, she thought about Marcus, sitting in his jail cell, finally facing the consequences of his choices. Despite everything, she found herself hoping that he was using this time to understand what he'd done, to find a path toward genuine redemption. The criminal trial was still weeks away, but Jasmin felt ready for it now. She had built a new life from the ashes of her old one, and she had found a purpose that gave meaning to her pain. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength she'd discovered in herself and the support of the community she'd helped create. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victims to help, new battles to fight. But tonight, Jasmin Brown, survivor, advocate, and voice for the voiceless, felt at peace with who she had become. The Baltimore County Criminal Court was packed on the morning of Marcus Brown's sentencing hearing. Jasmin sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Elena Rodriguez and Carmen. Behind them, the support group she'd founded filled an entire row. Ruth Goldstein, Margaret Foster, and 5 other survivors who had become like family to her. Detective O'Brien sat with the prosecution team, his case files finally reaching their conclusion. It had been almost a year since Jasmin first discovered the missing money and heirlooms that had started this nightmare. Now, as she watched Marcus being led to the defendant's table in handcuffs, she felt a complex mixture of emotions she'd been wrestling with for months. Marcus had aged visibly during his time in custody. His once perfectly styled hair was now gray at the temples, his face lined with stress and what Jasmin hoped was genuine remorse. He had accepted a plea deal 3 weeks earlier, admitting to charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Patricia had received a suspended sentence and probation in exchange for her testimony against Dr. Steinberg, who was facing separate federal charges for his role in the broader conspiracy. Mrs. Brown, the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Martinez, had explained during their preparation meeting, "Your victim impact statement will be crucial in helping the judge understand the full scope of damage caused by your son's actions. You can speak about the financial harm, the emotional trauma, and the impact on your family relationships." But Jasmin had struggled with what to say. How do you quantify the betrayal of someone you raised, loved, and trusted with your life? How do you balance justice with mercy when the perpetrator is your own child? Judge Robert Harrison called the court to order, and Jasmin felt her heart rate increase. She had testified in the guardianship hearing, spoken at dozens of community presentations, and addressed the Maryland legislature about elder abuse protections. But this moment felt different. More personal, more final. "We are here today for the sentencing of Marcus Brown," Judge Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of years spent making decisions that altered lives. "Mr. Brown has pleaded guilty to multiple charges stemming from the systematic financial abuse of his elderly mother, Mrs. Jasmin Brown." The prosecutor presented the case's details methodically: the $47,000 in total financial theft, the conspiracy with Dr. Steinberg, the attempted guardianship fraud, and the broader pattern of elder abuse that had been uncovered. "Your Honor, the defendant's actions represent a particularly egregious violation of trust. He targeted his own mother, a vulnerable elderly woman, and attempted to steal not just her money, but her independence and dignity." Marcus's attorney, a young public defender named David Chen, ironically, Dr. Sarah Chen's nephew, argued for leniency. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges the severity of his actions and their impact on his family. He has struggled with gambling addiction, which led to increasingly desperate financial decisions. During his time in custody, he has participated in addiction counseling and has expressed sincere remorse for his actions." Judge Harrison looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Brown, you have the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. Do you wish to make a statement?" Marcus stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to my mother, to my family, and to everyone I've hurt through my actions." He turned to look at Jasmin, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I know I can never undo what I did. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way." Jasmin felt her own eyes fill with tears as she watched her son, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him, struggle to find words for his betrayal. "I was drowning in debt and addiction," Marcus continued. "I convinced myself that I was protecting you, that I knew what was best for you, but I was really just trying to solve my own problems at your expense." His voice broke. "I stole from you. I tried to have you declared incompetent. I almost destroyed our family. I am so sorry." Judge Harrison nodded. "Mr. Brown, while your expression of remorse is noted, the court must also consider the severity of your actions and their impact on the victim. Mrs. Brown, you have the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement. Would you like to address the court?" This was the moment Jasmin had been preparing for, yet dreading. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. Elena squeezed her hand as she rose, and Carmen whispered, "You don't have to do this, Mom." "Yes, I do," Jasmin replied quietly. She walked to the podium, looking out at the packed courtroom. Her support group members gave her encouraging nods. Detective O'Brien offered a supportive smile. Even Dr. Chen, who had driven down from her practice to be present, nodded encouragingly. "Your Honor," Jasmin began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "My name is Jasmin Brown. I am 80 years old. I was a librarian for 43 years. I raised 3 children, including the defendant. I have been married, widowed, and I have lived independently for the past 5 years since my husband's death." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I am here not just as a victim, but as a survivor. What my son did to me was devastating, but it was also transformative. It forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed." Jasmin looked directly at Marcus, who was watching her with rapt attention. "Marcus, you tried to steal my money, $47,000 that I had saved carefully over decades. You tried to steal my independence by having me declared incompetent. You tried to steal my dignity by suggesting I was losing my mind. But you failed." Her voice grew stronger. "You failed because you underestimated me. You forgot that I am the woman who raised you, who taught you right from wrong, who showed you the importance of integrity and honesty. You forgot that I am stronger than you ever imagined." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter seemed to pause in her work. "Your Honor," Jasmin continued, turning back to the judge, "my son's actions caused me tremendous pain. I questioned my own sanity. I felt isolated and afraid. I experienced the profound betrayal of having my own child, whom I loved unconditionally, try to steal my life from me." She paused, feeling the weight of the moment. "But I also want the court to know what else happened. Through this experience, I met Elena Rodriguez, who became my advocate and friend. I met Detective O'Brien, who showed me that the system can work when people care about justice. I met Dr. Sarah Chen, who restored my faith in medical integrity." Jasmin gestured toward her support group. "I met other survivors who became like family to me. Together, we've helped dozens of elderly people recognize and escape abuse. We've spoken to thousands of people about warning signs. We've advocated for stronger legal protections." She looked back at Marcus, her expression softening slightly. "You are my son, and I love you. I don't say that to minimize what you did. I say it because love and accountability aren't mutually exclusive. You need to face consequences for your actions. But I also hope that someday, when you've done the hard work of understanding why you made these choices, we can find a way to heal our family." Jasmin's voice became firm again. "Your Honor, I ask that you sentence my son to a term that reflects the seriousness of his crimes but also provides him with the opportunity for rehabilitation. I ask that he be required to continue addiction counseling and to make full restitution for the financial harm he caused. I ask that he be prohibited from managing the affairs of any elderly person until he has demonstrated genuine change." She paused, looking around the courtroom one final time. "But I also ask that when he has served his time and made amends, he be given the chance to rebuild his life. Because that's what we do in families, even when they've been broken by betrayal. We leave room for redemption." As Jasmin returned to her seat, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Carmen reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, that was beautiful," she whispered. Judge Harrison took a moment to compose himself before speaking. "Mrs. Brown, your statement demonstrates remarkable grace and wisdom. The court is moved by your ability to seek both justice and healing." He turned to Marcus. "Mr. Brown, you have a mother who loves you despite your terrible choices. You have a family willing to leave room for reconciliation. That is a gift that many defendants in this courtroom do not have." Judge Harrison's expression grew stern. "However, the court must also send a clear message that elder abuse will not be tolerated in this community. Your actions represent a particularly egregious violation of trust that has had far-reaching consequences." He consulted his notes. "Mr. Brown, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months, contingent on your continued participation in addiction counseling and anger management programs. You are ordered to pay full restitution to your mother in the amount of $47,000, plus interest and court costs. Marcus nodded, accepting the sentence without protest. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, upon your release, you will be prohibited from serving as a caregiver, guardian, or financial manager for any elderly person for a period of 10 years. You will be subject to 5 years of supervised probation, during which you must continue counseling and perform 500 hours of community service with organizations that serve elder abuse survivors. The judge looked directly at Marcus. I hope you use your time in prison to reflect on the profound harm you caused and to prepare yourself for the work of earning your family's trust again. That will be a much longer and more difficult process than serving your sentence. As the court was dismissed, Marcus was led away by the bailiffs. Before disappearing through the door, he turned back to look at Jasmin one final time. She met his gaze and nodded. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement that she had heard his apology and that the door to redemption remained open. Outside the courthouse, the support group gathered around Jasmin. Ruth Goldstein wiped tears from her eyes. I don't know if I could have been as generous as you were in there, she said. It wasn't about being generous, Jasmin replied. It was about being honest. I am angry about what he did. I am hurt by his betrayal. But I am also his mother, and I remember the little boy who used to help me in the garden. Someday, maybe, I can help him find his way back to being that person. Detective O'Brien approached them. Mrs. Brown, I wanted you to know that your case has led to significant changes in how we investigate elder abuse cases. We've created a new protocol based on the documentation methods you used, and we've established a rapid response team for financial crimes against seniors. Elena smiled. And the legislature passed the Elder Protection Act last month. It includes stronger penalties for financial abuse, requirements for second opinions in guardianship cases, and funding for support services like our groups. Marcus didn't just steal from me, Jasmin said, looking back at the courthouse. He unwittingly created a movement. Every person we've helped, every law we've changed, every family we've saved, that's his unintended legacy. Carmen put her arm around her mother. What happens now, Mom? Will you keep doing the advocacy work? For as long as I'm able, Jasmin replied. I've found my purpose in this work. But I also want to focus on our family, on healing what can be healed and building something new from what remains. That evening, Jasmin sat in her Victorian home, surrounded by the friends who had become her chosen family. The support group had gathered for an impromptu celebration, but the mood was bittersweet. They had achieved justice, but at the cost of family bonds that might never fully repair. Margaret Foster, who had successfully fought off her own family's attempt at guardianship, raised her teacup. To Jasmin, she said, who showed us all that being elderly doesn't mean being powerless. To survival, Ruth added, and to the courage to speak truth to power. To second chances, Elena said, looking directly at Jasmin, and to the wisdom to know when they're deserved. As the evening wound down and her friends departed, Jasmin found herself alone with Carmen. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset through the kitchen window. "Do you really think Marcus can change?" Carmen asked. "I don't know," Jasmin admitted. "But I know that people can surprise you. They can disappoint you terribly, but they can also find ways to redeem themselves. He has 18 months to think about what he's done and who he wants to become. And if he doesn't change?" Jasmin considered this. "Then I'll grieve for the son I thought I had and continue loving the family I still have. You, the support group, the community we've built. That's my family now, too." Carmen nodded. "I want to be more involved in the advocacy work. I want to help other families avoid what we went through." "I'd like that," Jasmin said. "It would mean a lot to have you as a partner in this work." As they cleaned up the kitchen together, Jasmin reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a victim, isolated and afraid. Tonight, she was a survivor, an advocate and a leader, in a movement that had helped dozens of families and changed state law. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Detective O'Brien. "Saw the news coverage of today's sentencing. You should know that 3 more elder abuse victims have come forward this week. citing your case as inspiration. The work continues. Jasmin smiled and showed Carmen the message. The work continues, she repeated. But so does the healing. She thought about Marcus, spending his first night in prison. She thought about the other inmates who might benefit from his addiction counseling, the community service he would perform, the long journey of self-examination ahead of him. She thought about the possibility, however distant, of family dinners again, of trust rebuilt, of forgiveness earned rather than simply given. But mostly she thought about the woman she had become through this crucible. Jasmin Brown, survivor. Jasmin Brown, advocate. Jasmin Brown, who had refused to be silenced, who had fought for her dignity, and who had transformed her pain into purpose. The memory thief had tried to steal her life, but in failing, he had helped her discover a life more meaningful than she'd ever imagined possible. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected gift of all. As she prepared for bed, Jasmin looked around her restored Victorian home, her sanctuary, her headquarters, her testament to the power of resilience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victims to help, new battles to fight. But tonight she was at peace with who she had become, and hopeful about who she might yet become. The story that began with theft and betrayal had become one of survival, justice, and the possibility of redemption. And in the end, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.